So first of all, how many of you are in the field for 10 years or more? Wow. How many of you would like to come up and give this presentation? No. 5 to 10 years. All right, 5 years or less. Yeah, pretty good mix. That's great. How many of you work for nonprofit organizations? Great. How many of you work for an organization that provides services to nonprofit organizations? Okay, so we're mostly nonprofit organizations. That's good to know. How many of you are not AFP members? Okay, all of you AFP members, especially you board members, and I know you're out there. Did you see those hands? Talk to those people before they leave. Kind of the filter that I'm using for my presentation this afternoon is the filter of looking at this from a perspective of major gifts and for like capital gifts. Not really focused in on communications of impact with sponsors or foundations, that type of thing. So this is basically focused in on the donor perspective. The basic assumption I'm going to make throughout the presentation is that all of you together are a lot smarter than I am by myself. So that's why I'll ask for feedback and input. When I do that, if you can keep your answers relatively short, sometimes it'll just be people shouting out answers, and that's great. In some cases, we're going to ask you to give a little bit of background or information about your specific organization, how you do something. And again, try to keep those to a couple sentences when we do that. The other thing that I like to do at the beginning of a presentation is kind of manage expectations. If you came today hoping to walk away with a complete communication plan and know everything that you need to do to communicate impact, and you were going to learn that in 45 minutes, that's not going to happen. So what I'm hoping to do over the next half an hour or so is provide you with some very, common sense sort of approaches. A lot of this is going to sound very familiar to you, and it's which is good. Hopefully you're going to pick up at least 2 or 3 things that are new, that are ideas that you can take back to your organization and use as you try to communicate impact to your donors and supporters. Okay, and this is one you can just kind of shout out. What is the number one reason that people give to any organization? Okay, and we have the all-experienced fundraisers in the group. That's right. Absolutely. Survey after survey really confirms the fact that someone asked for the gift. And that's the number one reason people give. What is probably the second highest reason that people give?
Because
they volunteer. Another. They care, and somebody else said something over here. Emotional connection. Mission fit.
They're guilted.
They're what?
Guilted.
They're guilted. That's part of the ask thing, I think. Any other ideas?
The organization provides services to them.
Okay, so past experience, or generally what I'm hearing is some form of your mission strikes a chord with them. Your vision and values as an organization align with their vision and values. So it's very important when we're talking about communicating impact that we keep in mind that besides being asked, that probably the top reason that people give to an organization is because they believe in that organization. They think that the mission and what that organization does in the community is very important. So keep that in mind when you're designing the different pieces that you're going to put together to talk about impact in your organization. And again, because I've got experienced fundraisers in the group, I expect you'll all know this. Complete this sentence. Fundraising is all about? Okay. How many said relationships? All right, very good. And that really is the crux of fundraising. It's your relationship, whether you have a follower on Facebook or Twitter, or you have a contributor to your annual fund, or somebody that comes to your events, or if they're on your board or whatever, it's all about relationships. And when we talk about communicating impact, it's a way to really deepen that relationship. So again, basic stuff, common sense, but a lot of times we forget when we're trying to put together these great brochures or websites or planning the strategy for our donor meeting. The crux of what it is we're trying to really deepen that relationship. So when you think about communicating impact, think about things that will deepen your relationship with that particular donor. I do a lot of feasibility studies, and so I'm interviewing donors on a pretty regular basis. And typically, I'm like the bartender or the priest. They'll tell me things that they won't tell you. And when I ask this question, in terms of, the nonprofit that we're having this interview about, because we've got this great campaign and we want to tell them about it, and I ask, well, what are some of your concerns about the organization, or how do you feel about the level of communication that you get from the organization? The number one thing that I typically get from a potential donor who's not involved as a volunteer, or they're not a board member, or they're not on a committee, or they haven't been, a recipient of services, the only time I hear from you guys is when you want money. And I would guess that I hear that probably somewhere between 40 and 50% of the time with folks who are not engaged with the organization on a regular basis. So there is a perception out there that we don't communicate enough with our donors. And if it's maybe we communicate with them, but we don't communicate with them in meaningful ways. So again, something to keep in mind as you're trying to develop different ways to talk about impact in your organization and with your constituency is they want to hear from you. They're excited about what it is that you're doing. And you need to talk to them at times other than when you're doing an ask. So other than the annual appeal letter or the capital campaign or the major gift solicitation, they need to hear from you on a regular, consistent basis. And it has to be something that's specifically geared to where they are at. It's not one size fits all sort of a thing. So here's some important things to know. That number one, they are passionate about your mission. They want to know that their gift made a difference. And they want to know how it made a difference. And they want to have a relationship with your organization. And it's more than just writing a check. It is more than the guilt thing. So again, as you're putting together different types of communications with your donors, be sure that you keep these things in mind. Because if you don't tailor the message of your impact specifically to the donor with these things in mind, they're not going to hear it. So you want them to hear the impact that you have, and you want it to hear it in their terms. Let's spend just a few minutes and let's kind of go around the room and people can talk a little bit about how do you define impact in your organization. And you just stick your hand up if you want to talk about this, and I'll call on you rather than everybody shouting out at once. Yes?
I'm with Benjamin Rose Institute on Aging, and for us, one of the areas that we can have direct impact is when we're able to provide home care to aging seniors, and so that they can stay in their homes
Okay? Anybody else? How do you define impact in your organization? Julie, you're smiling in the back. What do you guys do at Malachi House? How do you define that?
We give the number search, which is generally kind of ineffective, other than it's nice to have that number around it. But when I write material, I tend to play more upon the emotions. So it's about compassion, offering compassion, love, care, those types of things to people who don't normally receive that, or who wouldn't receive that if we were not in the picture at Malachi House.
Okay.
It's kind of an intangible thing. We kind of struggled with exactly what can you say that measures impact, other than people who would normally not have a home to be provided loving care at the end of life have a loving home to provide that care.
Okay, so you use some statistical data, but you also then you tell the kind of the human side of the story. And your impact is, again, what's the primary impact that you guys have?
We care for those who have nowhere else to be cared for at the end of life.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes.
Accessibility to the arts measured by number of free community events and folks who attend those events.
Okay, so accessibility by those in the community that attend free arts events is kind of that's how you measure your impact. One measure of impact. All right. Anybody else? Yes.
Well, we kind of, there's different levels of impact, so we look at the number of people served. I'm with the Achievement Centers for Children, so we look at how many people are served with different therapies, we look at how many children are in our autism program, we look at how many children are in our child development program, how many kids that go to different camps at Camp Cheerful. But then we also look at goals that are set with each family or with each client and how far they've made it toward their goals. So that we see that they're not just coming to the program, but that the program is helping them.
Okay, again, some statistical data, but then also you're quantifying that and you're saying that, this was the impact of them being in the program, how they've achieved their goals. Great. Anybody else? There's a lot of different ways that you can talk about impact, and again, I think it has to be very specific to your organization. It has to be very specific to your donor base. And, we mentioned these a lot. The statistics, they're important. And we said we weren't really going to talk about foundations and, corporate sponsors and things. But even to our donors, they're going to want to see some sort of statistically based results that talk about your impact. If you have an organization and you're raising $2 million a year and you serve 2 people, that's probably not as compelling a story as if you're serving 200. So the numbers do have some meaning and they are important, but several of you talked about the idea of success stories in terms of talking about how someone's life was actually changed, or what the impact was of them being able to take advantage of the services. These go a long way, and again, it's important to know your donor base so that you're selecting the type of stories that are going to, resonate with them. One of the things that wasn't mentioned, and that is independent confirmation. Some people that, especially like in the education field, if you're in a medical field, there's outside organizations that can come in and they can actually quantify some of the impact that you're having in terms of standards that you're meeting. There's different things for certification that have to be maintained. These are all things that you can talk about when you talk about impact And a lot, you know, again, for certain donors, having that outside verification is something that's really important to them. Testimonials. You know, we've talked a couple times about people that have received services from your organization. They can tell a very powerful story about how their life was changed. Any other ways that people use to talk about impact in their organization, or ways that you convey that to your donor base that we have that aren't up here? Specific examples. Anybody? This is all of them? Really? This is it, huh? Okay. I think we can pass out the pillows in about 5 minutes here. Lunch has really kicked in, so. Again, I think what we're trying to focus on here is to show you that there are a number of different ways to tell your story. And there's a number of different people and tools that you have at your disposal that'll talk about impact, and it'll be very specific to your donors and something that'll ring really true to them. Question?
Well, I might sort of split the independent confirmation point a little bit. In the past, we've talked about economic impact. We've had an arts organization, so we've talked about the economic impact on the community where we're located. So there was actually, we worked with an organization that did a study to measure that for us. So, the data may or may not be relevant today, as good today as it was, 8 years ago when we did the study. But, it allowed us to talk about economic impact for a few years.
Great. And I think that, talking about, other effects that you may have, especially economic impact, again, is a way to kind of strengthen what you're also doing with your mission. And again, the fact that you used an outside source to do that lends a lot of credibility to the process. Okay, this is for you to give some feedback. What do you all feel is the most effective way to communicate impact to your donors? Is there a particular medium or a particular way that you feel is the most effective?
Visits so they see it.
Visits, okay. What else?
Letting them directly observe their dollars at work.
Okay. What are some of the other ways that people do it? Videos, and where do you, on your website, on Facebook, where do you put those?
Yes and yes.
Yes and yeah.
YouTube.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Yes.
We do little storybooks about residents who have been at Maliki House, and then that's one of our non-acts. We send it out as a Valentine. We don't do it every year, but maybe every 5 years.
Okay, great. What are some of the, anybody do newsletters? Okay. Anybody send out donor updates? You guys don't do that? How many of you pick up the phone and call a donor and talk to them personally about their donation and how it impacted your organization? Seeing about at least a dozen hands go up. So I think that the message here is there's not a one and tried and true method that is the absolute best method in terms of communicating your impact to your donors. It has to be, again, the idea of the message has to get to them in a way that they're willing to receive it and that they're willing to hear it. And all of you use different ways, and that's great. And it sounds like you've done your homework and you know what works for your organization. So again, we've kind of hit on this, and I want to kind of reemphasize the idea that when you're, regardless of the medium that you're using, whether it's social media, whether it's a printed newsletter, your website, personal visits, group visits to the organization, the important factors to keep in mind is that you want to talk about how your organization has changed lives. We're talking about statistics, we're talking about success stories, testimonials. The bottom line is donors want to know how you changed lives. So when you're communicating with them, that's the one thing that you really need to keep in mind. Regardless of how you present the story, when you get to the end of the story, the donor has to hear, see, and feel how you've changed lives. What's the best time to communicate with your donors? Christmas? When you're not asking for money? Well, you do have to communicate with them when you do ask for monies, but yeah, that's okay. What's another time that you want to, that's a really good time to communicate with donors? Okay, holidays. Again, customizing it, very good.
Right after they've given you a gift.
Excellent, that's good. When you say thank you. Other times that you want to communicate with donors. I like the thank you idea, that's excellent, and it's because, you've got a really strong connection there, and you also, again, have that opportunity to tell them exactly how their gift impacted someone's life, how it made your organization a better organization. Other times that you might want to consider is if you have a milestone that's happened in your organization. That's stuff you can send out, and again, across all the different mediums, something really important that's happened in the organization. And it's good for everybody to know that and be aware of it, but again, there doesn't necessarily have to be an ask involved in letting them know about it. Another time you want to communicate is when there's trouble. Because they should hear about that from you. They shouldn't see it on the Channel 5 news or read about it in the paper. A couple presentations ago we were talking about fraud, and usually that's something that kind of blows up, and there's a lot of media coverage and things like that. So when there's an issue with something going on in the organization, make sure that you're getting your side of the story out to the donors. The other thing in terms of the best time to communicate with your donors is doing it on a consistent basis. Having a regular schedule of things that happen when you're talking about the impact. It can't be sporadic. If you want donors to pay attention to your member or to your message and the information about how you're impacting the community and people's lives, they need to get used to seeing and hearing that communication on a regular basis. And if it happens just twice a year, as long as it happens every year, twice a year, then that's okay. But if it happens 6 times one year and once the following, they get lost. So you want them looking forward to whether it's the newsletter, whether it's the Facebook post, or whatever medium you're going to use to communicate with them when you're updating your website. That needs to be done on a consistent basis. Who should be telling your donors about your impact and telling your story? Everyone. Okay, good. Then we're done here, right? Who are some specific folks that you would think of that are important to tell your story? Board members. How many of you have board members who say, I can't raise money, I cannot ask for money? The rest of you have your board members very well trained. How many of you think that your board members could pick up the phone and call someone and thank them for their donation and tell them what that meant to the organization? There's a lot of different ways to get board members engaged in the process. So don't think it's just a matter of, well, you got to be the door opener for us, or you have to get them to an evening with 4 other couples type of a thing. So, and board members are a key part of the process. Who else? specific individual should be telling your story?
Your clients.
Clients, excellent. And again, you probably want to, if you're going to select clients to tell a story, unless they're giving you just snippets, quotable quotes, sort of a thing that you're using on, again, Facebook, the website, in your newsletter, in your appeals, what have you. That's one way to do it. But if you're going to have them actually tell the story, make sure that you work with them a little bit. You talk to them, you have an idea what it is that they're going to say. Give them a script. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't want to put words in their mouth, but you want to help structure the message. And you want to make sure that, that what they're telling people, again, is consistent and demonstrates what your impact is.
Your entire staff.
Exactly. Volunteers. These are all great suggestions. Thought we were done. Keep going. Anybody else? How many of you have someone in your organization that greets people when they come in the door or picks up the phone and handles all the phone calls? Show of hands. That person probably touches more people in the organization than, any of the teachers, any of the curators, regardless of what type of service that you're providing to the community. That person that greets people when they come in touches more people in the organization than almost anybody. So that's a very important person to make sure that they understand how to talk about impact, how to answer basic questions, those kinds of things. Who said volunteers? Julie in the back. How do you have your volunteers tell your story, Julie?
Usually we make sure that all volunteers actually come to Malachi House itself, not just serve like in an outside capacity, so that they actually understand about the house. They have a tour, they learn about the history, we have a volunteer handbook, we've got a film that they watch. Some of our volunteers are actually hands-on caregivers they can train to actually work directly with the residents, so they get a fairly well-rounded experience. They're asked to encourage people to attend events, things like that. Sign thank you notes, talk to people, all kinds of stuff.
If you didn't take copious notes during that see Julie afterwards, because that's probably one of the most thorough ways I've ever heard anybody in this kind of a setting talk about that. And again, volunteers, because they are committed to the organization, not only financially, but they give of their time and talent, have a tremendous impact in their ability to talk to people and talk about the things that you do. One of the other things that's really important if you engage volunteers is have them talk about why do they volunteer. What is it about this organization, your organization, that is different from all the other organizations they could have volunteered for? And if you let them tell that side of the story, again, that's a tremendous impact. Your donors are going to see how engaged they are, and that's really going to raise the level of what you do for the community. I wanted to make sure that we kept ourselves on time here, and I know that all of you have other stuff to get to, so just a few quick closing thoughts. Again, how you communicate impact is very specific to your organization. At the end of the day, when you're talking about impact, it needs to relate back to how you are changing lives, how you are impacting lives, and the difference that you're making for people. So no matter how you tell the story, make sure that in the end, that's what it is. The medium that you use is not as important as the message, but the message needs to be tailored to the medium that you use. People on a Facebook post are not going to read a 4-paragraph story. They might link to it, but if you're trying to get to them from Facebook, have the message be appropriate to the medium that you're using. Understand in your donor base who is going to be using the various ways that you're communicating with folks. Certain people are newsletter people. Other people are going to go to your website to get information. Other people are going to do, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, whatever. But understand the different mediums and how people are going to hear your message. And the final piece is, it's all about the donors. And so the language that you use, the way that you tell your story should be focused in on the donors and where they are at. Don't use a lot of jargon. Tell your story in terms that the donor is really going to be able to understand, and they'll have a much better feeling of how you impact folks. You're going to deepen the relationship, and they're going to be with you for a much longer time.